segment. I was really moved by Immaculate's testimony of being victim to moving to being forgiver. It's a tremendous movement ontologically to go from hopelessness to offering hope. I'm not sure that I buy the whole package of the PovertyCure. You've been in Mongolia. I've been in our Canadian Arctic. I've been around the world. And I think that unless there is some kind of movement, some kind of transformation, if there isn't hope, then how do you move out of poverty? And here's where we need to ask some very serious questions. If we're going to look critically at the gospel, if the gospel is going to be our base, then we have to need to look critically at the gospel. So if we're looking at the people that Jesus healed, if they were no better off afterwards, what was the point of the healing? And now we need to become a bit of an exegete to understand that in the healing miracles of Jesus, the physical healing is but a secondary effect of the spiritual healing that happened in those people. And we need to ask the question, why is it that those whom we do not expect to have faith, and those whom we expect to have it don't? Why is it that the Jews do not accept him? And we have someone in extreme of the Roman centurion, who Jesus says there is no greater faith in all of Israel. Really, all of Israel? Even more than John the Baptist? Really? All of Israel? All of Israel. Just say the word, I'm a man of authority, and I believe. You give the order, and my servant will be healed. Notice what the church has brought back into the English liturgy at the time of communion are the words of the Roman centurion. I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. The faith, it's that movement. The movement in Immaculata of being victim of seeing her family slaughtered to saying, I forgive you, is a tremendous, fundamental inner core change in her. If you're going to lift people out of poverty, there has to be that change. But for that to happen, there needs to be some kind of infrastructure. Otherwise, we can preach to people who don't have clean water, and if you're dehydrating to death, the message of Christ is meaningless. It has no meaning. If you're starving to death, it has no meaning. We have to be able to offer, and I think the message of the film was, what has Christianity done to supply that transition, to allow for that inner core change? And it's hope. Immaculate says, Africa doesn't need your food. Africa needs your love. It needs your love. Well, I I've been asked to come here to talk about Catholic missions in Canada. And you're probably wondering, what the heck is he going on about? Well, I think it's that message of love and providing an infrastructure for movement that began in 1908 with what was called the Catholic Church Extension Society of Canada. But of course it begins much further back than that. See if this is going to work. Oh, how about that? Okay, a couple of pictures I took in Buenos Aires in the same park. Buenos Aires is a city of contrast. And on the right, we have a young guy sleeping on a park bench, covered in a garbage bag. I don't know if any of you have you seen Tim Schmaltz's Jesus on a Bench?
Oh.
It's all around the world now.
There's one at Regis.
There's one at Regis.
No, Regis.
Okay. There's one in Rome, and he's a friend of mine, and he was talking to me about the concept, and so I sent this picture to him. He didn't use it, but it's the same kind of image. That's Jesus. That's Jesus sleeping on the park bench. What got him there, and what got this guy to come out of his office at lunchtime to take a break in the park in Buenos Aires? What's available to them? It's what's available to them. Can we bring this man out of the garbage bag, become this man? Maybe in some circumstances, maybe. But it's a huge movement, and if you don't have the infrastructure for that, it can't happen. Justice can't roll on like a river, because there is no justice. There has to be someone to bring that message, and that of course is the movement of the gospel. Bishop Corvo spoke at one of our events this year, the St. Philip Neri event, and he said that our Canadian missions are as poor as African missions, not so much in terms of economics, but in terms of spirituality. Before becoming the Bishop of Nelson, he was the head of the
Capuchins.
Yes, the head of the Capuchins. And he would go around the world visiting his priests, and he went all throughout Africa. And then he became Bishop of Nelson. And then he traveled into the north. Canada is a country of huge contrasts. And part of my job as president of Catholic Missions in Canada is to go around preaching, as I'm doing now. I go into parishes. And people always say, Father, you're talking about missions in Canada. Are you talking about Canadian missionaries who go off to other countries? And I say, no, we just focus on the country of Canada. Oh, what are you talking about these missions? We're a first world country. We're a first world country along the American border. And then you go north. And the further north you go, it becomes more like the developing world. So that when I go into the high Arctic, and I see how people are living, and that they're paying $600 for a bottle of whiskey because their guilt is so tremendous, they didn't feed their children. They need to drown their sorrow in this dry community. There is a spiritual poverty there. Corvo said, you can go to Africa, the people are spiritual. They will celebrate. They will begin spontaneously to sing and to be joyful. But amongst our indigenous people, who populate most of the high northern regions of our country, you won't find that. And you won't find it because they were never taught it. And they weren't taught it because we bought into a government system of enculturation that tried to wipe out First Nations, Inuit, and Métis language and culture. And unfortunately, our church was part of that, because at that time, it was a Eurocentric world. They thought that they were doing the right thing. Now, of course, you can't take the lens of today and examine yesterday. We have to see what are we doing today. John Paul says, have gratitude for the past, have enthusiasm for the present, and move into the future with confidence. Move into the future with confidence. Well, it began a while ago. Nope, that's not where I want to be. How do I go backwards? Can I go backwards? Which one do you press to go backwards? Oh, you press it there. Okay. Okay, good. Good, yeah. So in the age of discovery, in the 1600s, the Canadas, the Americas, India, China, the world was opening up. And the church said, souls. We could save souls. And so they went with the explorers. And so it was the case of Lower and Upper Canada, when Champlain came, and then the explorers after him, and with the coming of the missionaries with Brebeuf and the boys. Let's look at the New World and spread the gospel, because there are souls to save. And so the propagation of the faith began as a Roman congregation to look after this. And for a long time, we thought we were doing the right thing. But now we look with the lens and we go, no, colonialism. That wasn't the proper thing to do. But it got done. And we can't change it. In time, religious denominations set up schools across the country. And the government said, let's use those schools because they're in place and will provide an education for these Indians. When did they figure out that they hadn't reached India? And so through the residential school system, you had a cultural genocide. And then in the 1960s, the churches began to say, this is wrong. This has got to stop. Unfortunately, a lot of boys and girls disappeared or died in those institutions. They were taken forcibly. They were punished if they practiced their culture or their language when they came home to their parents. They could no longer communicate with their parents. So that today, amongst our indigenous peoples, we have a people who have lost their soul. They don't know who they are. They're no longer living a subsistence lifestyle. And so when you go north, in each of those communities, there's a place called the Northern Store. And that's where you buy your furniture and your ice machine and your food. So, At Easter, I went up to King William Island to a place called Johaven. King William Island is famous because Franklin left his ship there and died, and they discovered the ship not far from there. And now, you go to Johaven, and you go into the northern store, and you'll be the only Caucasian person there. And you're going to go and try and buy some food because you're there for a week. And produce is going to rot after a day. You're going to pay $25 for a chicken. And you'll see the Inuit, what they're buying, pop, chips, sweets. It's not a good situation. Where's the hope? I feel so sorry for a child who was born of indigenous parents. Not everywhere, but in the places that I've been to, children as young as 10 years old are committing suicide. Does a 10-year-old have enough of a self-concept to commit suicide? Because there's no hope. They come back to their homes, and their homes are locked, or mommy's boyfriend is going to beat them up or sexually abuse them. They can't go with daddy because daddy's girlfriend hates them. When their parents are around, they're stoned or they're drunk. Not everywhere. Not everywhere. What can we give them? What can we give them? In 1908, a priest from Prince Edward Island, Father Burke, decided that he wanted to help European immigrants coming to the new country of Canada. And so he began the Catholic Church Extension Society to provide for Catholics, churches, priests, and the necessities of faith. And so began my organization. And what we try to do is to help bishops subsidize their missions because they don't have sufficient funds. Thank you. They don't have sufficient funds to subsidize. So, a bit of history. As Canada was being formed, and people were coming from Europe and populating provinces as they were being developed, dioceses were being erected. 200 years ago, priests from Quebec journeyed to what became Manitoba on the Red River at St. Boniface. So imagine a group of 3 priests who were responsible for the pastoral care of everything west of Ontario. Everything. West and north of Ontario. And they did. And they went to places unknown, and some of them died doing it. Now, in the north, there was never really a whole lot of people in the north. There weren't roads to the north until the building of the American highway, the Alaskan highway in World War II. You couldn't get from lower Canada, from the 49th up to Whitehorse. There was no road. The only way you could get there was either to take a ship from Seattle and get off at Skagway and take the Northern Pass, or you basically had to go by dog sled. And if you got lost on a dog sled, well, you just weren't heard from again. The northern part, Yukon, what became the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, now the Diocese of Garrard-McLennan and Keewatin-Lapah, well, there just weren't a lot of people there. They were like hills. There were areas that maybe in time could become dioceses, self-sufficient, and sending missionaries around the world. As a gift to Canada, in 1967, Rome decided that they were going to make those vicariates into dioceses. Whether that should have been done or not is debatable. But they did. The problem is today, they're not self-sustaining. So my organization helps bishops sustain their missionaries. That's where most of our money goes to. So just to show you here, everything in color is what Catholic Missions in Canada subsidizes. In Quebec is our sister organization, Mission Chez Nous, and we share 3 dioceses with them. So if you look at that map, and you're going, Canada is a first world country, one of the best standards of living in the world, how do you get 23 of 44 English-speaking dioceses not being able to sustain themselves? It's a very serious question. And for people who are living along the American border, enjoying that first world status, and living here in Toronto, everything we want is here, but you go up to Whitehorse, or you go to Churchill and get eaten by a polar bear, it's a completely different world. It's a completely different world. So, out of about $4 million that we give out a year to the 23 dioceses, the vast majority is just looking after the missionaries themselves. Let me give you an example. Before I was doing this, I volunteered to go to the Yukon, and I was based in Whitehorse. And I would travel all over the Yukon and down into northern BC. And we would go around on routes to different churches. So the longest route was down into Dease Lake, Telegraph Creek, and Iskoot. You remember Dease Lake because the 2 guys in the summer went on their murder spree, and they started out in Dease Lake. So I would drive 1,600 kilometers in a weekend to go to 3 churches. So you look at the size of the Yukon, you can put a couple of European countries in that space, and there were only 5 of us, 5 priests, who were looking after all of that. Mackenzie Fort Smith. So you're going to multiply the Yukon by probably 4 or 5, because Canada goes up. They've only got about 5 priests. But there you can't drive everywhere, you have to fly in. It's exceedingly expensive. So maintaining the missionary takes up, this year, 68% of the $4 million that we give up. We have churches and properties, 9%. When there isn't a priest, then we train lay people in the community to administrate it, 3%. Then you've got religious training, you kids, you got to prepare for First Communion, baptism, confession, confirmation, and adults. That takes about 9%. And then we have 38 seminarians that we subsidize, and that takes up about 11%. That's what we do. Now, what does all of that actually achieve in terms of what we've just seen? So, here's a, why am I there? I'm not supposed to be there. Yes, I am. All right. No, I won't argue with it. So, beautiful canola field. There's nothing like a canola field on a sunny day when it's in full bloom. This is in Saskatchewan. This is in the middle of Saskatchewan in the Prince Albert Diocese. Now, here's the difference between inculturation and enculturation. Inculturation is a colonial model where you take a group of people and you impose on them your Eurocentric worldview, your language, and your religion. Now, for missionaries to really do mission work properly, according to the church, missionaries need to appreciate the culture and language and the people of where they're going to. It used to be that Canada would send missionaries. I don't know, are you an order priest?
I was with the Institute, the Missionary Institute.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
We remember the China missions, the Scarborough Four missions, Jesuits, Franciscans, and all kinds of religious orders that we would send around the world. And we would look after them, and we would train them. Now, in the Yukon, at least, well, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, going into Nunavut, you have Nigerians, East Indians, Filipinos, and Polish. The problem that we're having right now is that an attitude exists to come here in order to send money back home. That's the wrong attitude for a missionary to have. And you can't come here and say, my church experience in my country is this, and you're going to have this. Well, you're just going to lose those people altogether, and you're going to do damage. So I want to talk to you about Muskeg Lake Cree Nation. I went there in the summer. Bishop Thebino, who had been a missionary in Africa, said to his mission priests, you're going to learn the Cree language and culture. And I went at the time when they were graduating from this program. And so I got to spend a day at Muskeg Lake, where the Cree are, and learn about Cree culture. Now I have to really take my hat off to them because I'm terrible with languages. I don't know that I could learn Cree. I have enough trouble with English. I don't remember 5 minutes ago, so my memory isn't really great. When you go into a group of people and you offer Mass in their language, and you include some of their culture in the liturgy, it lifts them. It transforms them. They appreciate it. It takes a long time to establish trust. I get a lot of calls from people saying, Father, I got some vacation time coming up. Where could you send me for a couple of weeks? I said, nowhere. I'm not interested in you. Unless you can commit for 3 years, there's nothing you could do. What are you talking about? I said, well, what if a Nigerian showed up at your church and said, hi, I'm here for 2 weeks. I'm going to save you. You say, so long. You're costing us money, and God's here already. God's here already. Now, think of the European missionaries who came here to bring the savages God. They already had God. They already believed in the Creator. And so it's very important for us to have a proper understanding of what mission work should be about. The problem is, the church doesn't speak specifically about what a mission, the noun, is. It talks about the verb, to be on mission, not the noun. Even my own organization, we had to come up with our own definition of what a mission is. The last parish I had in my diocese in Hamilton was Owen South. Do you know the Bruce Peninsula? You guys know the Bruce Peninsula? Yeah? All of the Bruce Peninsula was my parish. I had 8 churches to look after. And those outside of the city of Owensound were called missions. They were missions. They were just little churches for millionaires on vacation. Well, you had to be a millionaire to buy a cottage there. I mean, come on. When we talk about missions in Canada, we're talking about usually, not always, but usually, someplace that's hard to get to, far from resources, high unemployment, not always, but often is of an indigenous population, and is too poor to be able even to pay the priest who has to travel to get there. So I can tell you, when I was in the Yukon, and I was traveling 7 hours drive from Whitehorse down to Dease Lake, one summer, twice, nobody showed up for Mass. That's a 7-hour drive, so 7 hours worth of gas. You got to stop and eat. And then you got 7 hours to go back. Now, nobody paid for that gas. Nobody paid for that food. But you don't worry about it because you can't have that kind of attitude when your life is to bring the joy of Christ to people who can't afford you. Now, of course, in the Catholic Church, somebody's going to pay. But who pays? Because they can't. Catholic missions in Canada pays. Making sure that there is a missionary who could be a priest, a religious sister or brother, or a layperson, to go and to minister the gospel to them. When we get into indigenous areas, so in terms of the Prince Albert area of Saskatchewan, having gone through the residential school system, it's strange that they would be asking, demanding a priest. And this is the great paradox that you encounter in indigenous communities. On the one hand, they sue the church. On the other hand, they demand the priest. On the one hand, some of them might have been abused by a nun or a brother or a priest. They still want the priest in the community. A sister won't do, a brother won't do, a lay person won't do. It has to be the priest. Why? Because for them, the priest and the church means that God's in the community. Now, we know different. But that's how they think. That's how they think. Because the priest and the church means that there's hope. And in these communities now where murder, incest, suicide, rape, these are common things. The priest is there to try and help them make sense out of something that makes no sense. Helps them to celebrate baptisms, and weddings, and first communions. Helps them mourn when an elder passes. I'll tell you a funny story. You want a funny story? I'll tell you a funny story. First time I went to the Yukon, I was sent 8 hours out of Whitehorse down to a place called Iskut in BC. An elder had died. I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't even know where to go to the church, where the church was. When I arrived, nobody told me. I had to drive around this place to try and find the church. And the funeral wasn't at the church. It was at the community hall. So, I do the funeral. We go and we bury this man. We dig the grave, we put the casket in, I say the prayers, and then we fill in the hole. Everybody, right there, right then. Got it done. Then, we go back to the community center. There are 300 people at this funeral. And laid out on a long table is all of the game this man had in his freezer to feed 300 people. So I don't know anybody. I'm sitting at the back waiting for this thing to get over so I can drive 8 hours back to Whitehorse. So somebody comes up to me and says, "Father, what are you doing sitting back here? You were helping with the funeral. You got to eat first." Okay, get out of here sooner. So I come up to the table and I'm looking at this stuff and I go, "I don't know what any of this stuff is." "Well, this over here is bear, Father." "Oh, what about that?" "That's beaver." "Okay, how about that?" "Oh, that's marmot." "What's that?" "Groundhog." "Well, here, take some of this, Father." "What's that?" "No, I don't think I want that." "What is it?" "That's moose nose." Moose nose. "What if the moose had a cold?" And they all start laughing. "It's okay, Father. We boiled the snot out of it." And then they said, "This is the delicacy. You have to have this." I said, "What is that?" I said, "It's bum guts." "Oh, I don't know. What are bum guts?" "Well, Father, bum guts is the fat around the anus." I said, "I draw the line at bum guts. No bum guts." Now, why was I telling that story?
Context, Father.
Anyways, culture. do we appreciate about a people's culture, how they define themselves? What are their traditional foods that they want to share with you because they respect you? And you respect them by accepting who they are. The dignity of the human person. The dignity of the human person made immaculate, able to do that impossible thing, to forgive that woman who said her husband, her father, had killed her family. How do you do that? She was Jesus Christ. She was Jesus Christ. She was Joseph sold into slavery. She was Jeremiah put into the well. She was Jesus Christ nailed to the cross. To be lifted out of poverty, out of spiritual poverty, is to make that movement to transcend being human to being divine. Because that's what Christianity teaches. The human being is called to be divine. To join the Godhead. To be lifted out of our animal nature and to transcend ourselves. For Immaculate, to do what she did, she had to die to self. Meaning, she had to do something other than come up with hate for that horror story that she had in her head. She had to undergo that fundamental inner core change of hate, revenge, a murderous rage, to say to the person who owed her, I forgive you the debt. I'm paying the price for you. That's what Jesus Christ did on the cross. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. I'm paying the price for you. A lot of times when I'm preaching about reconciliation, I say, imagine a bank manager. You have a loan, you go in, the crops just wiped out the farm, and somebody bombed my house. There's nothing left. I can't pay anything. And the bank manager says, gee, I understand. Don't worry about it. Have a nice day. Wow. Except we forget that the bank manager is still out of that money. The bank is out of that money. The bank has to pay the debt. And that's what reconciliation is. And that's what hope is. Accepting the dignity of being made in the image and likeness of God. Does that mean that God has a nose and 5 fingers? No. It means that we are able to choose between the good and the bad. To love or to hate. Remember what she said. Africa doesn't need food. It needs love. And love is the infrastructure to make that change, to lift someone out of poverty, because it gives hope. That's what Catholic Missions in Canada tries to do. So Catholic Missions in Canada funds the cultural camp that Bishop Thevenot sent his Filipinos and Nigerians to, so that they can celebrate Mass and the sacraments in Cree, so that the Cree people go, maybe Canada's not such a bad place. Maybe people do care about us. We're part of something. The history isn't just only bad. And we can celebrate our God as we know God to be. Now, when I went, now they all speak English. When I went to King William Island, to where the Inuit are, I don't speak Inuktitut. So when I was celebrating Mass and Easter, there was a guy there who translated my homily from English into Inuktitut. I said Mass in English, they responded to me in Inuktitut. It worked. It worked. Not everybody could speak English, yes.
How many minutes does it last?
How many minutes does the
When is
Mass
it finished
last?
until?
Oh, it was about 45 minutes.
So when is the next video going to be shown?
Tonight? I think it's it. I think I'm it.
So how is the story like? Sorry.
Okay. No more videos, sorry.
Sorry about that, Father.
Okay.
Peter. Sorry about that.
Okay. Inuktitut. So, cultural appreciation, enculturation. Enculturation. What do we know about the indigenous who are in our city? Are they simply people lying on the street? Do you know what the worst part about being a street person is? I don't know, because I'm not a street person, but I was told this. The worst part about being a street person is being invisible. You think about all the people walking on Bay Street back and forth, dealing with millions, billions of dollars every day, and they're stepping over people who are sleeping on the street. It's the worst thing you could possibly do. Of course, everybody's afraid because they might be schizophrenic and stab them in the eye or something. Whenever I come upon a street person, I try to stop and have a conversation. Hi, how are you? Hey. No, I'm talking to you. Yeah. Hi, what's your name? They don't know how to respond. What? I'm a person. You see me? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's Bob. How's it going today, Bob? Oh, I think it's okay, you know? All right. When I can, I try and buy him or her a sandwich. I thought about walking around with eggs, boiled eggs in my pockets, but what happens when you run out and you can only carry so many boiled eggs? One guy did that. In Whitehorse, there was a van that would drive around and they would give out sleeping bags. Of course, in Whitehorse, it's completely different because it gets to be minus 30, minus 40. So, unless you've got a really good sleeping bag, it's not going to do well for you. What else do we do? So, Bishop Thibodeau, this is the Muskeg Lake Cree chief. This is the priest who invited me. He's a Nigerian. And these are a couple of Nigerian sisters who work in the area. Now, my beloved Yukon. This is the bridge at Carcross. And when I was rector of the cathedral in Whitehorse, there was an arrangement with the Salvation Army that the kitchen in the hall of Sacred Heart Church was going to be an interim solution to offer Saturday and Sunday hot, nutritious meals to people. And so there were 19 groups in the city who would rotate, they'd bring in their own food, they would cook it there, it was very nutritional food. We would feed 160 to 180 people every weekend. Every weekend. Then the health unit came and said, some of your food is being cooked at home. That's not sanitary. So we're going to have to shut you down. I said, tell me, how many people have gotten sick over the 20 years of this interim food program? Has been going on for? Well, that's not the point. I said, well, I think it is the point. And so you're saying to me it would be better for them to starve than to get sick of botulism and maybe throw up, go to the hospital, maybe die, but in Canada, people die of botulism in Canada. You know, that's what you're saying to me, it's better for them to starve? So the newspaper got a hold of it, and people in Whitehorse got really upset. And then the CBC Whitehorse invited me to come early in the morning and to be interviewed. He said, well, you know, maybe they've got a point, maybe, okay. But like some of our people cooking, they're older people, they can't come to the church and do the stairs. So a parishioner, a guy who was becoming Catholic and whose wedding I witnessed, the health minister, stepped in. Said, Father, don't worry about it. They were worried because we were getting moose from outfitters, and maybe they were butchering the moose in their garage, and maybe there was some grease there. Believe me, grease is the last thing you need to worry about with your moose. Or maybe it was roadkill. So Father, keep doing it. You're doing a good thing. You're doing a good thing. And so we would have, in the Yukon, there are all kinds of different First Nations. Even in the city of Whitehorse, there are 2 different First Nations. And there were men who would sleep out in -30 and come in and have a hot meal, a hot, nutritious meal, Saturday, Sunday. We had a program going where we would put coats, mitts, hats in the trees outside, so that if somebody wanted to come along and take that, they could. They didn't want to come in to a place and pick it up and be seen. So when you walk through Whitehorse in the winter, you'll see these trees going, why is there a Canada goose in the spruce tree? And so you'll know. Enculturation, caring for people by feeding them. Now, this is in Fond du Lac, and where's Natalie? There you are. Natalie's at the back. Natalie just wrote an article in our upcoming magazine that my editor at the back, Jeff in the red, just put to publication. And if you subscribe to our magazine, or you want to, in the winter issue, you're going to read Natalie's article about going up to this region. you want to say something about that for a minute, Natalie?
Okay. Well, I was in Wollaston Lake. It's nearby to Fond du Lac, maybe a couple of hours or so. I'm not quite sure. In August, for a week and a half, we were participating in the community's annual pilgrimage. So they go a couple of hours away by boat to this island, and they participate in daily mass and rosary, and the archbishop comes, who also knows their language. Their language is Dene. Just we were spending time with the kids and doing Bible-based activities with them, and just being a presence for the children and the youth in particular, to know that they're loved and that people do care about them, as Father Reilander was saying.
Wonderful, thank you. Brother Gamache was a French missionary right out by the northwest border in Saskatchewan. Was the pastor. And the picture that I showed you before of the garden was the garden that he started, so that he could feed the people when the hunt was not good. He's a much beloved memory of that church. Now, when you go to these places, when I go as a priest to these places, as president of CMIC, they all save up their baptisms for me, because you haven't seen a priest in a while. So when I go, I tend to be pretty busy doing those sorts of things. But everybody remembers Father Gamache and what he did for the community. And the garden continues to this day. There it is. And it's right behind the rectory. So, just 3 examples of things that Catholic missions in Canada gets involved in. We only subsidize Canadian missions. And the vast majority of the money that we raise comes from southwestern Ontario. We don't have government funding. We are not funded by the Archdiocese. Some people think that we're funded by Share Life. We're not. That the Mission Sunday collection comes to us. Do you know that all of the Mission Sunday collection goes to Rome? Rome said, Canada, you're a first world country. You look after your own, but we'll take your Mission Sunday collection. Nothing comes to Catholic missions in Canada. Now, the Archdiocese takes up a collection for us in August. Maybe some of you remember that. I want to thank you for your generosity. So what we're doing, do we deal directly with poverty? No, we don't. Do we give to Indigenous? No, we don't. But we provide the priests, the church, the necessities of the faith, so that they can celebrate. And the missionaries and the churches offer them hope, to lift them up. Now, the Indigenous situation in our country it's a disaster. Neither you nor me had anything to do with it. The government is giving them lots of money. There's lots of money on reserves. Does it always get to who it's supposed to go to? That's another thing. They have to find their own solution. We can't give it to them. That's colonialism. They have to find their own solution. But I think that historically, there hasn't been enough time from the experience of the residential schools. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, they have to find their soul. Now, in terms of how the country was laid out, of Europeans coming as missionaries, whoever got there first, that's what they are. The Anglicans got there first, they're Anglican. Catholics got there first, they're Catholics. Presbyterians, they're Presbyterians. They've got to find their soul. We can help them, but we can't find it for them. But we can respect that they are created in the image and likeness of God. We can try to provide the infrastructure of love to say, you are valued Canadian. But ultimately, they have to find their own solution. And they're doing that. There are some tremendous stories that are happening. There are some very well-run reserves. I got involved in mission work because I like working with the indigenous who were part of my parish in the Bruce Peninsula. The bishop said, why don't you go get some training in religious affairs? So I did. And then I talked to some of the bishops who were up there, and I thought, they don't need me down here, they need me up there. So I went. And then when I was there, they called me back to run this organization. Canada is a country of contrast. We in the rich South need to care for our brothers and sisters in the North who don't have the resources we have. I think we have to find it within ourselves to reach out to provide that infrastructure of love that will ultimately address spiritual poverty and economic poverty. I think I've gone on long enough. You look pretty bored, so I'll take any questions you've got.
Thank you, Father.